My name is Emily Hastings. I'm 30 years old, and the last gift my mother ever gave me was a choice, my sister, or the door. I chose the door. I was 18. My savings account had just been drained to zero, and everything I owned in the world fit inside one backpack. For 5 years after that night, not a single person in my family dialed my number. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday in March, my mother called me in tears and finally said the sentence she'd apparently been saving up for half a decade. "Your sister needs you." When I found out the real reason behind that phone call, I sat alone in my car in a hospital parking lot and laughed until my ribs physically ached. But here's what none of them understood in that moment. The laughing wasn't the ending of this story. It was barely the beginning. I grew up in a 2-story house just outside Dayton, Ohio, with a cross-stitched sign hanging over the couch that said "Family First." My mother, Diane, stitched it herself, one careful letter at a time, and for years I actually believed it. It took me a very long time to notice that the sign never once specified which family member came first. That house ran on a system, and the system had exactly 2 jobs built into it. My sister Renee, 4 years older than me, held the first job, being fragile. She was the pretty one, the sensitive one, the daughter whose feelings could apparently be wounded by an unkind weather report. Her job came with full benefits. My job was the other one. When Renee was 12 and knocked our mother's casserole dish clean off the counter, I was 8 years old, and I was the one handed the broom. Nobody ever announced this arrangement out loud. It was simply understood, the same way you understand which chair at the table belongs to your father. When I brought home straight A's, the report card stayed taped to the refrigerator for exactly 3 days before it quietly disappeared. Renee's certificate for participating in a middle school choir hung framed in our hallway for over a decade, gold sticker slowly fading under the hall light. I'm not telling you my parents didn't love me. I'm telling you their love for me came in exactly one flavor, and the flavor was confidence. Confidence that I would manage, that I would cope, adjust, absorb, and quietly clean up whatever mess needed cleaning. In our house, "You're so strong" was never a compliment that stood on its own 2 feet. I learned to flinch at that sentence the way a waitress flinches when a party of 12 walks through the door at closing time. Because in the Hastings family, praise for me always traveled with luggage attached to it. Somebody was about to hand me something heavy, and the compliment was simply the receipt. I just didn't yet know how heavy that luggage could eventually get. I found out the spring I turned 18. At 15, I got a job running the register at a grocery store, 4 evenings a week plus every Saturday. I had exactly one laminated goal: nursing school. Since the bank wouldn't let a minor open a savings account alone, my mother co-signed as a joint owner on the account. Write that detail down somewhere safe, because it's going to matter enormously later. For 3 straight years, I deposited nearly every paycheck I earned. Birthday money went in. Christmas money went in. I skipped my senior class trip to Chicago and put that money in too. By the spring of my senior year, the balance read $9,300, and I used to look at that number the exact way other girls looked at prom dresses in a store window. Meanwhile, Renee was running her own experiment in the opposite direction entirely. She started community college and quit after a single semester. She married a long-haul trucker named Derek 1 month after meeting him at a gas station, had a baby girl named Sophie at 21, and separated from Derek before Sophie could even walk. She and the baby lived in an apartment 15 minutes from my parents, and my parents paid for most of it. Quietly, the way you pay a bill you're privately embarrassed by. I loved Sophie from the very first day of her life, and I need that fact on the permanent record before anything else in this story unfolds, because that tiny girl with the impossibly serious eyes had absolutely no say in anything her mother would eventually do. The week I turned 17 and a half, I circled a single date on my calendar. My 18th birthday, the day I could finally open my own account, in my own name with my own single signature on it, no co-owner required. I wasn't being paranoid. I had been raised in that house. I was fluent in its language. I planned to move every last dollar the morning I turned 18. My mother beat me to it by 9 days. I found out at an ATM outside the grocery store on a Thursday evening after my shift. I'd stopped to deposit my paycheck like I did every single week. The machine spit out a receipt, and the receipt said my available balance was $0.00. I stood there in my work polo, reading that slip of paper like it had been printed in a foreign alphabet. I actually fed my card back into the machine and checked a second time, because a clerical error genuinely seemed more plausible to me, at that moment, than the actual truth. Then I drove straight to the house, walked into the kitchen, and set the receipt down on the table directly in front of my mother. She didn't even pretend to be surprised. She was drying a pot at the sink, and she simply kept drying it. She said Renee was 4 months behind on rent. She said the car was about to be repossessed, and a mother with an infant cannot be left without a car. She said the word family the exact way other people say, obviously. My father sat at the table studying the salt shaker like it personally owed him money. I asked when exactly they had been planning to tell me. My mother finally set the pot down and gave me the specific look she reserved for whenever I was being difficult, which in our house was simply the polite word for inconvenient. She said they'd planned to explain everything properly, as a family over dinner. She said Renee was in a crisis, and crises don't politely wait around for someone's birthday. And then she delivered the sentence that had scored my entire childhood, the one I could stitch onto a pillow from memory alone. The strong one, Emily. You'll be fine. There was no mention whatsoever of paying it back. None, not one word. And that absence was the exact detail that reorganized something permanently inside my chest. It had never been a loan in their minds. It had never even been my money in their minds, not really. It was simply the family's emergency fund, and I was the family's emergency employee. And the emergency, as it always had been and always would be, was named Renee. I didn't scream. I went upstairs and started making phone calls, because even at 18, that was simply who I already was. The bank was polite and completely useless. Joint account, joint owner, every single withdrawal perfectly legal, sunlight clean. The woman on the line was very kind to me. People are usually kind to you when they're handing you absolutely nothing else. Friday morning, I called the police non-emergency line and described the whole situation, and the officer on the other end sighed the specific sigh of a man who had heard this exact story dozens of times before. "If her name's on the account," he said, "it's not theft. There's no crime here, miss, just family." I want to be perfectly clear on this point because people love asking me why I didn't fight harder. I did fight it. I lost in under 24 hours on the actual legal merits to a rule book my own mother had quietly signed us both into back when I was 15 years old and hadn't understood what I was agreeing to. Saturday, my parents called me down to the kitchen. On the table sat a single typed sheet of paper. My father wouldn't meet my eyes at all. The header read family loan agreement, but the actual text underneath said something entirely different, that the $9,300 had been my voluntary, freely offered gift to my sister. No repayment ever expected. All it needed was my signature at the bottom. My mother held out a pen and calmly explained that signing would let all of us move forward without any further ugliness. I asked what would happen if I refused to sign. My mother's voice went flat and smooth as a frozen lake in January. "Under this roof, we are a family. If you can't live with that, Emily, there's the door." I looked at my father. He looked at the table. I went up to my room, pulled my old backpack out of the closet, and started folding. You'd be genuinely surprised what makes the final cut when your entire life has to fit inside a single bag. 2 work polos, a pair of jeans. My documents zipped inside a plastic folder. Birth certificate, social security card, and that ATM receipt folded once. Because some quiet part of me already understood I might need proof someday that I wasn't imagining any of this. And one photograph. Sophie, at her first birthday, cake smeared across both fists, laughing at something happening off camera. I took the picture of my sister's daughter, and not one single picture of my sister. Make of that whatever you'd like. I came downstairs. Nobody was posted at the door to stop me, which told me absolutely everything about how this particular movie was supposed to end. I was supposed to get scared out on the porch and come back inside and sign the paper. My mother stayed in the kitchen. Through the doorway, I could see her wiping down a counter that was already spotless. My father was standing in the garage doorway with his hands buried in his pockets. As I walked past him, he pressed something into my palm without saying a single word, and then turned and studied the lawn mower with sudden fascination. 2 folded $20 bills, $40 total. That was my father's entire testimony on the matter, delivered in cash. I walked out to my car, mine, legally, thank God, bought used with cash and titled in my own name, because my old manager had warned me months earlier to do exactly that. I sat behind the wheel for 1 full minute, waiting to feel something enormous. Here is what I actually felt: quiet. It had taken them 19 years to fully teach me the lesson, but I finally had it memorized word for word. Love in that house was an invoice, and the invoice was always, always addressed to me. I drove to my coworker Jenna's apartment and slept on her couch that night. Nobody called. Here's 5 years, compressed, because I refused to make it sound sadder than it genuinely was. I slept on Jenna's couch for 6 weeks and paid her back in groceries. I took a certified nursing assistant course, 6 weeks, the cheapest possible ticket into healthcare that exists, and started working at a rehabilitation facility, wiping down handrails and quietly learning that bodies and families tend to fail in remarkably similar ways. I worked 2 jobs simultaneously and chipped away at my prerequisites at community college, one single class at a time. At 20, I got into a 2-year nursing program on a partial scholarship stacked with a federal loan. I studied in break rooms. I studied in my car between shifts. At 22, I passed my boards on the very first attempt and cried in the parking lot of the testing center, which was the only location I permitted myself to cry that entire 5-year era. By 23, I was a pediatric nurse at a children's hospital, and I just signed the lease on a 2-bedroom apartment. The second bedroom was going to become my office. Remember that detail. It matters enormously later. Now, the other ledger. In 5 full years, my family called me exactly 0 times. Not on a single birthday. Not once at Christmas. Not even the day I graduated with my nursing pin, an event the local paper actually printed with my name spelled correctly. I kept count the entire way through. Nurses are good at charts. I'd love to tell you I healed the deeper wound underneath all of it too, but brutal honesty is simply the house style of this particular story. I just quietly relocated the wound. I became the nurse who covered absolutely everyone's shifts. 4 full years without a real vacation. Being needed was the only dialect of love I had ever been taught to speak, and I still spoke it fluently. I'd only changed who exactly I was speaking it to. Then, one Tuesday night in March, I was 23 years old. My phone rang at 9:40 in the evening. The screen displayed a number I hadn't seen in 5 full years, but knew instantly the way you know the back of your own hand. The house line. My parents were the last 2 people left in Ohio still paying for a landline, which tells you everything you need to know about their general relationship with change. I stood in my kitchen in scrubs, holding a mug of tea going steadily cold, and let it ring 3 full times before something older than my own judgment reached over and picked it up for me. My mother was already crying before I even said hello. Real crying. I want to be fair about that. My mother's tears were always genuinely real. They were simply never, not once, actually spent on me. Emily, thank God, your sister needs you. No hello. No happy belated birthday, 5 of them stacked up and owed. No, how are you? No, are you safe? No, did you eat? No, where do you even live now? I stood perfectly still and listened to 4 straight minutes of weather reports from a country I had personally immigrated out of 5 years earlier. Renee was in trouble. Renee was overwhelmed. Renee was fragile. This could destroy Renee completely. The entire call was about my sister, in the exact same way every single call in that house had ever, in the whole history of our family, been about my sister. My own name mostly surfaced attached to a verb they urgently needed performed. I noticed, distantly, that my hands were perfectly steady. That steadiness frightened me considerably more than the phone call itself did. Needs me for what? I finally asked, and my mother's crying downshifted, smooth as an automatic transmission, into the warm managerial tone I remembered so well from that kitchen table. Come home Sunday, she said. We'll explain everything as a family. There it was. That word again, resurrected from the dead, aimed directly at me as though the last 5 years had simply been an unfortunate scheduling mix-up. I didn't say yes. I said the other thing instead, the thing that changed absolutely everything that followed. Give me the caseworker's name. Silence on a landline has a very particular texture, like an entire house is holding its breath at once. Then my mother said, far too quickly, that it wasn't like that it was simply a misunderstanding with some agency people. Agency people. That's the exact phrase where my stomach understood the truth before the rest of me did. This wasn't about rent money anymore. There was a child somewhere inside this story. I told her good night and hung up. At 8 the next morning, on my day off, I called Franklin County Children's Services and asked for the caseworker assigned to the file for Sophie Cole. Being a pediatric nurse opens that particular phone tree considerably faster than it opens for most people. I knew exactly which words to say and which extension to request. The caseworker's name was Nora Bishop. She had the voice of a woman managing 40 open files with absolutely no time left to decorate a single sentence, and I trusted her within about 60 seconds on that basis alone. Here is what she was legally permitted to tell me, and what my own mother had somehow, remarkably, failed to mention even once. 3 weeks earlier, on a Friday night, Renee had left 6-year-old Sophie home alone in her apartment and driven across the county line to a casino with a boyfriend. A neighbor heard a child crying through the wall around midnight and called 911. Police found her alone on the couch, television running, a box of dry cereal beside her. Renee came home at noon on Saturday. She was charged with child endangering, a misdemeanor, first offense, and the county opened a formal case. Sophie had been staying with my parents ever since. I wrote every single detail down on the back of an electric bill in careful block letters, exactly the way you chart a patient you absolutely cannot afford to get wrong. Then Nora asked, "There's a complication with the grandparents' home study. Are you calling as a potential placement option?" I told her honestly that I didn't yet know what I was calling as. Then I spent 2 full days finding out exactly what that word, complication, actually meant. And that's precisely when the laughing started. Piece 1 came directly from Nora Bishop. My parents' home study had failed, and the reason had absolutely nothing to do with their age or their finances. It had failed because Renee had moved back into their house, into my old childhood bedroom, a detail I'd learn later, and simply file under things that no longer had any power to surprise me. And county policy required that Renee, whose contact with Sophie was legally supposed to be supervised only, live somewhere else entirely. My parents refused outright. My mother informed the caseworker in writing that nobody on this earth had the right to put her own daughter out of her own home. Sit with that particular sentence for a second, because I certainly had to. Piece 2 came from my mother's very next phone call, sweet as pie filling, when she finally laid out the actual family plan in full. "Emily, honey, it's really all just paperwork. You've got the clean record. You've got the good job and the nice apartment. Sophie gets registered at your address. The county checks their little boxes. And then everything simply goes back to normal. She'd stay with us and her mama most of the time, and you wouldn't hardly have to do a thing. You're the only one whose background comes up clean, honey. You work in that world. They'll listen to you." And there it was, the entire machine, laid out flat on a lit table for me to finally see whole. If nobody in the family qualified, Sophie went into foster care, and the county's clock was already running. They didn't actually want a daughter back in their lives. They wanted an address, a clean record to rent, the exact way you rent a storage unit. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot after a 12-hour shift, and I laughed until my ribs genuinely hurt and my eyes ran, because I had finally, completely seen it. My clean record was the punchline of the whole joke. My stable job, my spotless background, my nursing license, every single thing they now urgently needed from me existed specifically because they had thrown me away 5 years earlier. Their own punishment had accidentally built their only remaining exit, and they didn't even hear the joke land. I didn't laugh long, though. Somewhere across town, there was a 6-year-old sleeping in a house run by the exact same 2 roles that had already chewed up her mother and me both, just from opposite ends. And a county clock was steadily running toward a stranger's spare bedroom. So on Monday, I called Nora Bishop back and said a sentence I had actually rehearsed in the shower like a speech. "I'd like to be evaluated as a kinship placement, the real kind. Full home study, background check, no shortcuts." I heard her pen physically stop moving. Then I said the second, slower part, because the second part was the actual decision underneath the first one. "And anything my family tells you, verify it with me directly. From now on, everything I do in this case happens in daylight." While the paperwork slowly ground forward, the county approved weekend visits, and that's precisely how I learned who Sophie Cole actually was as a person. The first Saturday, she walked into my apartment carrying her own small duffel and toured the entire place like a silent, thorough health inspector, touching absolutely nothing. Then she stood in my kitchen and asked me 3 questions, in order, like she'd carefully drafted them in the car on the drive over. Which food am I allowed to eat? I opened a cabinet and told her that whole shelf was hers now, and anything wearing a blue sticker was fair game any time at all, no asking required. Where do I go when you have company? I told her nowhere. This was her place too, and if I ever had company over, she'd be the very first person I introduced. She turned that answer over like a coin she suspected might be counterfeit. What happens if I break something and there it was? An entire biography folded into one 6-year-old's question. I took a glass down from the cabinet, handed it to her, and told her the truth. Things break, we sweep it up, nobody eats a broom over it. Then I handed her a plastic cup instead, told her it was unbreakable, and informed her that the current world record for dropping it was 11 times, and she was more than welcome to try for 12. That got me the first almost smile I'd ever seen from her. She dropped it 9 times before dinner, but Saturday night told me the real story. I passed her door and eased it open to check on her, an old nurse's habit. She was asleep on top of the comforter, not underneath it, still fully in her day clothes. Her sneakers stood side by side, laced, pressed tight against the bed frame, toes pointed directly at the door. I stood in that doorway for a long time. I know packed and ready when I see it. I invented packed and ready. Her second weekend with me, I found the actual proof. Sunday morning, she was watching cartoons while I vacuumed her room, and the vacuum head knocked against something solid tucked under the bed. I got down on my knees and pulled it out, a small pink backpack, kindergarten-sized, zipped completely full. I shouldn't have opened it. I'm glad I did anyway. 2 outfits folded with a level of care that would shame most adults I know. A toothbrush sealed inside a sandwich bag, a small box of raisins, and a stuffed rabbit, one ear worn down completely to the bare fabric, packed last, right on top, exactly where it could be reached the fastest. She had brought a go-bag to her own aunt's house for a single weekend. I was still kneeling there when I felt her standing in the doorway behind me. She didn't panic. She didn't even look surprised. She looked the exact way a kid looks when the teacher finally finds the note, resigned to explaining something she considered obvious. "Keep it packed so it doesn't hurt when they forget me somewhere," she said, in a level, matter-of-fact voice, reciting what was clearly a house rule. And I knelt there on that carpet, holding the strap, and I was 18 years old again in an upstairs bedroom, folding 2 work polos and a plastic folder of documents into a bag, because the people who were supposed to keep me safe had priced me right out of their own home. My bag had marked the end of my childhood. Hers was 6 years old and already permanently packed. Same family, same exact luggage, 1 generation apart. I didn't turn that carpet into a scene, and I didn't deliver a speech, because a 6-year-old with a go-bag has absolutely no use for either one. I zipped it back up, slid it exactly back into place, and said, "Okay, we'll keep it packed for now, it's yours. Nobody touches it and nobody forgets you here, but that call stays yours to make, not theirs." She studied me for a second, nodded once, and went back to her cartoons. The backpack stayed under that bed. Remember it. This entire story ends with that backpack. Over the following weeks, in the low-stakes hours, braiding hair, chasing the 11 times cup drop record, cartoons on a Sunday morning, Sophie started talking, the way kids do once their radar finally quiets down. It came out sideways in small crumbs, that the casino Friday hadn't actually been the first time, that there had been other mommy's weekends going back to when she was 5, where she'd been left in charge of locking the door herself, that she already knew how to make 3 different dinners, cereal, toast, and a cheese sandwich. Never anything on the stove because the stove was against the rules whenever she was home alone. She said all of it in exactly the same voice she'd used about the backpack. No drama, pure logistics. I sat on my own hands, kept my voice deliberately boring, kept my questions carefully open-ended, and inside my chest, something was being signed in permanent ink. Here's the thing about my job. I'm a mandated reporter. When a child tells a nurse she's been left alone overnight, repeatedly, at the ages of 5 and 6, the law simply does not offer a family discount exemption. And here's the thing about me, the thing I'd already decided in Nora Bishop's flat checklist voice weeks earlier. Daylight or nothing. I called her Monday morning and reported it formally. She scheduled Sophie with a child interview specialist, the kind with the soft-furnished room and the careful specialized training, and Sophie said all of it again, in that same steady logistics voice. The county amended its case. Renee's plan got significantly stricter. Parenting classes, attendance verified. Visits moved to fully supervised only. By June, with my home study cleared, Sophie's placement moved officially to my apartment. My phone started ringing at 11 that same night, the landline number pulsing on the screen like a smoke alarm going off. I let it go twice. The third time I answered, and my mother's voice came through with absolutely no tears left in it at all. "What did you tell them? What kind of sister are you?" I wrote that one down too. The collection was steadily growing. Part 8, Honey, then Vinegar. What followed was a 2-part campaign I could have diagrammed in advance, because I'd watched it run on other targets my entire childhood. Part 1, Honey. For 3 straight days, my mother was warmth itself. A chicken casserole appeared outside my apartment door with a note in her looping cursive about how proud she was of the woman I'd become. She texted me a photograph pulled from the old family album, me at 9 years old, holding baby Renee's old doll in one arm and a dustpan in the other. She meant it as nostalgia, as evidence of our closeness. It turned out to be better evidence for my lawyer than anything else in the entire file. Even her sweetest talk still told the truth, if you simply looked at what everyone in each photograph was actually holding. Then, right on schedule, Part 2, Vinegar. Sunday dinner, the whole extended family gathered, and my mother stood up over the pot roast and delivered what I later heard was the official version of events. Emily left home at 18 because she was selfish and broke her parents' hearts. Now, Lord willing, she'd been given exactly one chance to redeem herself by helping her own sister, and instead she was feeding the family to the government. Aunt Denise nodded along solemnly. 2 chairs down, my father passed the dinner rolls and said absolutely nothing at all. I want to be honest about what hearing that secondhand did to me, sitting alone in my own kitchen, picturing that whole table. It still burned. 23 years old, a badge, a license, a lease of my own, and it still burned straight through. But I'd learned something that spring that the county had been quietly teaching me all along. In that family, whoever told the story owned the truth. In a courtroom, the storyteller has to swear an oath first. Renee came to my apartment exactly once that summer, unannounced, on a Tuesday evening while Sophie was at a supervised library program. She arrived without any makeup on, and it genuinely shocked me. She looked ironed flat, somehow older than our own mother. And for the first time in my entire life, my sister sat down at my kitchen table and said something completely true. "You think I chose this," she said, staring at her own hands. "They decided I was helpless when I was 10 years old, Emily. You don't remember because you were 6 and busy being the other thing. Nobody ever once made me finish anything, not school, not a job, not my marriage." She tipped her chin towards Sophie's crayon drawing taped to my refrigerator and couldn't quite bring herself to say her own daughter's name in that sentence. "At least your role came with a spine. Mine came with an allowance." I sat very still, because I was watching the entire machine from a brand new angle, and it was, without question, the saddest view of it yet. 2 little girls, 1 house, 2 costumes handed down like inherited clothing sizes. Mine stitched entirely from responsibility. Hers stitched entirely from helplessness. Both of us fitted for our roles before either one of us could even read. For about 10 full seconds, I actually almost reached across that table. And then my sister, in the very same breath with the very same tired eyes, showed me exactly why the costume always wins in the end. "So you owe me," she said, soft and perfectly reasonable. "Tell the caseworker Friday night was the first time. Tell them I had the flu, not the casino." They believe nurses. You're one of them. They'll take it from you. There it was. The honest minute was over. It had only ever been an on-ramp. I said no. No explanation stapled to it, no apology cushioning the landing. And the older I get, the more I've come to believe that was the very first complete sentence of my entire adult life. Renee stood, gathered her purse, and smiled a smile I recognized instantly from our mother's kitchen. "Then I guess I'll have to tell everyone what you've been doing." What I'd apparently been doing, according to the family broadcast that followed, was stealing a child to punish my own sister out of pure jealousy. I let it roll straight off. Then September arrived. Sophie started first grade at the elementary school 6 blocks from my apartment. On the second Thursday of the school year, at 2:50 in the afternoon, my phone rang at work, the school's front office. A voice far too casual for the sentence it was about to deliver. "Ms. Hastings, just confirming Sophie was picked up early by her mother." "That's authorized, correct?" The floor of the nurse's station tilted sideways beneath me. It was absolutely not authorized. Renee's visitation was supervised only, and the school had the correct paperwork on file, but that paperwork was sitting inside a folder, and the folder was only ever as strong as whichever clerk happened to be at the front desk that particular afternoon. The woman on duty that day had seen a mother whose last name matched the one on the birth certificate and simply waved her through. I did not go screeching around the city like a movie. I stood in a supply closet with my heart absolutely slamming and did it strictly by the book. Called Nora. Called the police non-emergency line. Gave the plate number, gave the description, said the exact required words, unauthorized removal, supervised visitation order in effect. Then I performed the single hardest clinical skill I have ever owned in my entire career. I waited. 4 straight hours at 6:40 that evening an officer called. Located. Both safe. Food court at Eastland Mall. Renee had bought her daughter a soft pretzel and a small teddy bear, and when officers approached her, she was genuinely, sincerely bewildered by the entire fuss, because in her own private weather system, this had simply been a mother treating her daughter to an afternoon out. Nobody's villain in her own head. That's precisely what made the whole thing so quietly terrifying. When they finally brought Sophie back to me that night, she walked straight past the brand new teddy bear sitting on my counter, went directly into her room, and came back out holding the pink backpack by both straps, hugging it tight against her chest like a life vest. Nora called at 9 that night. Her flat checklist voice had something new inside it, something final. This changes the timeline, Emily. Temporary isn't going to protect her anymore. County moved fast after the mall incident. Renee's visits were locked down entirely to a supervised visitation center, 2 hours a week, a monitor stationed in the room at all times. The school issued a new pickup authorization card with actual photographs on it, and the principal apologized to me personally for 11 straight minutes. I eventually told her the front desk clerk was easily the least broken part of the entire system. But the conversation that actually mattered happened later, across my own kitchen table, where Nora laid her folder open and explained, in plain terms, what the word temporary genuinely meant in practice. As long as I remained simply a placement, the case stayed technically open, and open cases keep breathing on their own. Every 90-day review gave Renee another performance window to demonstrate stability. Every blood relative retained legal standing to petition the court. My parents were already, quietly, asking about returning to what they called a family arrangement. And there would be a hearing in the spring, and another one after that. Sophie would spend her entire childhood living inside 90-day increments, a backpack permanently stashed under her bed, waiting on the weather to change. Then Nora squared her folder shut and said, "There's a longer road if you're willing to walk it." She meant filing for full legal custody myself. Moving from simply the county's address on file to becoming Sophie's actual, court-ordered legal person, petitioner, formal party to the case, on the record, under oath, against my own family, inside a building with a flag hanging in every single room. I asked her what typically happens to placements who stay stuck in temporary forever. She went quiet for a second, and Nora Bishop was never, ever quiet with the difficult ones. "Learn to keep the bag packed," she finally said. I looked down the hallway at Sophie's closed bedroom door. Some sentences don't actually persuade you of anything new. They simply switch on the light in a room you were already standing inside. In October, I sat across a desk in a legal aid office that smelled permanently of burnt coffee, facing an attorney named Ruth Kessler, who charged on a sliding scale and never wasted a single word. My kind of person, immediately. We filed a formal petition for legal custody of Sophie Cole in Franklin County Juvenile Court. Attached to it, sworn before a notary, was my own affidavit, the entire pattern in dates and hard numbers, no adjectives anywhere. The joint account. The $9,300. The gift paper I'd refused to sign at 18. The door. 5 years of total silence, followed by the phone call not to reconcile, but to rent my clean record laid out in my own mother's cheerful phrasing, word for word. The casino night. The earlier nights. The pink backpack, permanently packed under a first grader's bed. Ruth read my draft twice through and finally looked up. "You understand what this actually does," she said. "It's not simply testimony about Renee. It documents the entire household. Once this is filed, there is no version of this story where you're eventually the daughter who comes back home." I want to tell you I hesitated for a long moment there, because it would make me sound warmer as a person. But the honest truth is that I thought of a 6-year-old correcting herself from home to my aunt's home, the exact way you'd correct yourself after getting caught stealing something. And I signed my name. And I noticed, the way you notice an old scar acting up in cold weather, that this was the second piece of paper my family's story had ever placed in front of me. At 18, they'd slid me a lie and a pen, and staying inside the family had been the listed price of my signature. At 23, I picked up my own pen and paid that exact same price, running fully in reverse. The lie would have kept me a daughter. The truth resigned that position permanently, in triplicate. Ruth filed it on a Wednesday. Copies were served to Renee, and because of the custody arrangement they'd been actively petitioning for, to my parents as well. I'm told the phone in that house started ringing before the envelope had even fully hit their kitchen table. The family went to war the exact way respectable families always do. No bullets. All narrative. My Aunt Denise called to personally inform me that suing your own blood was a sin she herself could never fathom committing. 2 cousins unfollowed me online, which I somehow survived. My mother's church prayer circle added Sophie's name to the weekly list. My cousin Kate read me the actual wording, asking the Lord to soften the heart of the troubled young woman holding her niece hostage from her rightful family. Hostage, with a library card and a booster seat installed. But the visit that genuinely took something out of me arrived on a Thursday in late October. A knock at my door, and through the peephole, my father. First time in 5 full years. He wouldn't even step inside. He stood in my hallway with his cap held in both hands, looking past my shoulder at Sophie's crayon drawings taped to the refrigerator, and delivered his piece the way a man recites something he's rehearsed alone in his truck. I know it wasn't right. What happened with your money? 5 years. And there it finally was, at the exact moment it could no longer buy anything at all. But your mother can't lose 2 daughters, Emily. Drop the affidavit. Settle it private. Keep it in the family. I asked him one single question, keeping my voice as flat and level as a kitchen countertop. Dad, was it right or wrong what you all did? Yes or no? And my father, 58 years old, 35 of those years married to the weather system that had run our entire household, looked down at my doormat and said, "That's not the point." There it was. I thought precisely, forensically, that was exactly the point. He left an envelope on my hall table on his way out. No letter inside. 2 $20 bills. $40. The second installment, 5 years after the first. My father's entire vocabulary on the subject, and it still, even now, didn't quite add up to a full sentence. 8 days before the hearing, Renee got herself a lawyer. My parents paid for him, of course they did. There is always money hiding somewhere in that family, the exact way there's always water hiding somewhere in a desert. It simply never surfaces on my side of the property line. He called Ruth with a settlement proposal, and Ruth relayed it to me across her desk in her flattest possible translation voice. They would agree to my custody, entirely uncontested, sign it tomorrow. In exchange, Renee's visitation would go fully unsupervised, effective immediately, and I would formally withdraw the affidavit. All of it. The account, the door, the entire pattern, the whole household scrubbed from the record as though it had never been sworn at all. Their exact phrasing, Ruth said, is that the family doesn't need old stories sitting in a public file. I sat with that offer, and I'll give you the honest truth about it. It wasn't nothing. Ruth said so herself. Trials are dice, and this handed me full custody without ever having to roll them. I could have Sophie, legally, permanently, by tomorrow afternoon. All I had to do was let the official record lie about the machine, and hand that same machine 2 unsupervised days a week to run, unmonitored, on a 6-year-old girl. I asked Ruth one single question, a nurse's question. Unsupervised, starting when? She checked the letter and answered immediately, and I saw it as clearly as any chart trend I'd ever read. Some perfectly ordinary Friday in February. A treat. An errand. A boyfriend. A casino across the county line. And a first grader locking a door behind her mother, because those had always been the rules whenever she was left alone. And under some future bed somewhere, a bag quietly repacked. I told Ruth I'd give her my answer by Monday, and I drove home the long way. That night, standing at my stove, not actually cooking anything, the phone rang. The house line. My mother had exactly 1 card left to play, and she played it beautifully. No tears this time. That's precisely how I knew this was the real, final offensive. My mother saved her dry voice strictly for closing arguments. Emily, sweetheart. A word I hadn't heard aimed in my direction since grade school, and I genuinely hated what it did to my chest on contact. She talked for a long time, and she was good at it, because every single thing she offered me was something real that had genuinely, actually been withheld from me for 5 long years. Come home, she said. Sunday dinners. Christmas morning, both of us, you and Sophie, stockings hung on the rail. Your old room is still your room. Renee will sign whatever the lawyers put in front of her. We can be a family again, honey. All of it starting Thursday. All you have to do, she said, is take the old stories out of the file, that's all. Families don't need judges, Emily. They just need one person big enough to finally let the past go. And I stood at my stove, 23 years old, holding that phone with both hands, and I'm going to tell you the whole truth here, even though it happens to be the least flattering sentence in this entire story. I wanted it. Every single cell in my body wanted it. 12 years I had spent standing outside the glass of that family, watching the kitchen light glowing warm through the window. And here was my mother, finally holding the door open, and the room behind her genuinely was warm, and it genuinely was real. And the price tag was hanging exactly where it always hangs in that particular house. The truth, retracted. The record, scrubbed clean. And the bill for all that sudden warmth quietly forwarded, as it always had been, to the smallest person in the entire family. This time, a 6-year-old with a go bag under her bed. My mother said my name again, gently, the exact way you coax someone back off a ledge. So we'll see you Thursday and you'll take care of that paperwork. I closed my eyes. I'll see you Thursday, Mom, I said, and I hung up before she could hear which sentence I hadn't actually said. Franklin County Juvenile Court, Thursday, 8:40 in the morning. Waxed linoleum, fluorescent lighting with a faint electrical buzz, an American flag gone slightly dusty at the fringe, and a hallway of blue plastic chairs holding other families through the worst mornings of their entire year. Sophie was at school, exactly where 6-year-olds belong during custody hearings. A friend's mother had pickup covered regardless of how the day went, because I plan for every outcome. It's the job. Our side of the hallway, Ruth in gray, Nora with her folders, Sophie's court-appointed guardian ad litem, a retired schoolteacher who'd interviewed us both twice already. Their side arrived in a procession I heard coming before I ever saw it. Renee in a small floral dress I'd have bet real money my mother personally selected, one more time for the role. My mother in her church clothes, chin lifted high, gripping my father's arm. My father in the same suit he wears exclusively to funerals. Before the courtroom itself, there was one final stop, a conference room where the lawyers laid the settlement on the table one absolute last time, for the record. A humming vent, a printed agreement squared neatly in front of an empty chair, and a pen resting diagonally on top of it, presentational, arranged exactly the way that gift paper had been arranged on a kitchen table 5 years and 2 entire lifetimes earlier. My family truly does love setting a table for me. My mother looked at me across it, and I'll give her this much. For 1 second, the look on her face wasn't remotely tactical. It was simply her asking. Renee's lawyer cleared his throat. Ms. Hastings, have you had a chance to consider our proposal? The vent hummed on. Ruth's pen hovered above her legal pad. Everyone in that room was waiting to find out which daughter had actually walked through that door. I opened my mouth. No, I said. The affidavit stays exactly as filed. Everything I have to say about my family, I'll say under oath, in the open, with everyone listening. That's the only kind of family conversation I do anymore. Nobody had a countermove ready, because there simply isn't one. You can outmaneuver a scheme. There is no available lever on a person who has already stopped negotiating in the dark. My mother's face closed up like a shop shutting down for the night. We went inside. Juvenile hearings are nothing like television. No jury box theatrics, just a tired judge, a court reporter, and the slow, patient machinery of question after question. When my turn came, I raised my right hand, swore the oath, and testified exactly the way Ruth had coached me, and exactly the way I'd charted patience my entire career. Onset, duration, frequency. The joint account dated. The $9,300 dated. The gift paper and the door dated. 5 years of total silence. I named the missed birthdays one by one, then the phone call, then the plan for my address, delivered in my own mother's exact cheerful wording. Then Sophie, the casino night from the county file, the earlier nights from the child interview, and the small pink backpack under a first grader's bed, permanently stocked with raisins and a worn-eared rabbit, so that it wouldn't hurt quite so much whenever they forgot her somewhere. The air in that courtroom visibly changed the moment I described the backpack. It always does. Grand betrayals impress people intellectually. But the small, quiet logistics of a child's fear will physically bend an entire room at the waist. Renee's lawyer came at me on cross with the family script, nearly word for word, and I watched the judge quietly clock its age. Isn't it true you've resented your sister for years, and this petition is simply your revenge? I let the question sit in the air a beat. If I wanted revenge, I said, I'd have simply stayed away. Staying away was already working perfectly fine for me. And that's when the script did the one thing I could never possibly have engineered myself. It read itself out loud, unprompted. Renee stood straight up at the counsel table, over her own lawyer's restraining hand on her sleeve, and cried out to the judge, to the room, to the flag on the wall, "She's the strong one." She was always supposed to be the one who handles things. The gavel came down, but by then it was already permanently in the record. My family's entire operating system testified to in open court by its own favorite child. Near the very end, the judge removed his glasses and finally asked me the question sitting underneath every other question. "Ms. Hastings, you're 23, single, working shift hours, first year into your career. Explain to me why you're asking this court for a child." I looked at my mother for exactly 1 second. She was sitting very straight, purse held on her lap like a shield, and I realized I had been waiting 12 full years to answer a question she herself had never once actually asked me. Then I turned back to the judge and answered him instead, slowly, because I only ever intended to say this once. My life, I was told I was the strong one. And in my family, strong just meant the one who pays. I've paid in money, and I've paid in years, and I'm done being strong like that. What Sophie needs isn't the strong one. It's something better. I'd rather be the one who stays. Court reporters' keys ticked it permanently into the record, and the silence that followed was the loudest thing my family had ever in my entire life given me. Then a chair scraped back, the loudest sound in this whole story. I mean that literally, and my mother stood up in the middle of the gallery. She didn't shout. Shouting, I'd have known exactly what to do with. She smoothed her church skirt flat, gathered her purse, and said in her dry closing voice, to me and to the room and to the permanent record all at once, "You were born cold, Emily. Keep the child. You've finally taken everything." And she walked out. My father rose in stages, the way he always does, and followed her. At the door, he turned and looked back at me for exactly 1 second. 1. I have spent years since deciding what exactly was contained in that look, and I've finally settled on this. It was an apology, sized precisely like $40. The door eased shut on its slow piston hinge. No slam. That house always did prefer a quiet exit above all else. I sat perfectly still in my chair, hands folded, and did not go after them. You have no idea what that cost me, and you have no idea what it bought me. I had just won my daughter-to-be and lost my mother in the very same 60 seconds in front of strangers under a dusty flag. Both outcomes permanent. Both entirely mine. What remained went quickly, the way the truly important part of a surgery is often the quietest part. The guardian ad litem, the retired teacher, read her recommendation in a steady classroom voice. Placement with the aunt should be made permanent. The child was thriving. Then, closing her folder, she added one more line. In this observer's opinion, the child has finally unpacked. She had absolutely no idea what she'd just said. Or perhaps she had every idea. Teachers usually do. Nora testified to a stable placement and a fully completed home study checklist, flat and professional. And when the judge asked for her overall assessment of me, she read straight from the note she'd taken at my own kitchen table back in April, the long one, about why I'd left home at 18. So that's what that note had eventually turned into. I could have kissed her clipboard. The judge granted full legal custody of Sophie Cole to Emily Hastings. Renee's visitation remained supervised with a written case plan attached, a genuine ladder backup, if she ever chose to actually climb it. Classes, clean months, consistency. The exact same ladder offered to every single parent inside that building. I want that noted clearly. The court left her a door, and so did I some machines you simply break. People you leave a ladder. Outside, the November sky over Ohio was the exact color of a nickel. I sat in my car in the courthouse parking garage, the very same driver's seat where I'd laughed until my ribs ached back in March. And this time I cried for about 90 seconds, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the folder holding the actual order. Then I blew my nose, fixed absolutely nothing about my face, and drove straight to the elementary school, because it was 2:40 and the pickup line forms early. Some doors close inside a courtroom. The door that actually mattered was the passenger door of my car, opening at 2:55 for a kid with her hood pulled up against the drizzle, asking what was for dinner. Here's the honest aftermath, because this isn't a story that sells easy lightning bolts. Renee came to the supervised visitation center twice in December. Once late, in January. By spring, some months she didn't come at all, and I'd sit in that center's parking lot with Sophie's booster seat in the back, working out exactly what to say, and Sophie would buckle herself in and say it for me instead. "Mommy forgot again." Logistics voice, but quieter every single time. And then one day, not quieter at all, just done. A fact filed away under other facts. "My sister isn't a monster. I need you to hear that from me, and not from strangers on the internet. She is exactly what that house built her to be, a woman handed helplessness as a job description at 10 years old, never once taught by anyone how to finish a single thing, so she simply doesn't. The ladder the court left bolted to her wall is still there. She has never once put a foot on it. My mother sent exactly one card that first winter. Cream-colored, her looping cursive as steady as ever. "When you're ready to apologize, we are ready to forgive you." I read it twice at my kitchen counter, and then I filed it into the plastic folder, the very same one I'd carried out of that house at 18, right behind a 5-year-old ATM receipt showing a balance of $0. Same handwriting on the ledger, if you know exactly how to read it. I never wrote back. The invoice had finally reached a customer who'd already closed the account for good. Then there was an evening in late spring, an entirely ordinary Tuesday, spaghetti on the stove, spelling homework spread across the table, when Sophie set down her pencil, walked to her room without a word, and came back dragging the pink backpack by one strap. I stopped stirring. She unzipped it on the living room floor like a surgeon opening a case, and then, businesslike, she dismantled it completely. The 2 folded outfits went into her dresser drawer. The toothbrush went into the bathroom cup. The raisins went onto her food shelf, the one with the blue stickers. Last of all, the rabbit with the worn ear came out and took up a permanent new post on her pillow, facing the door, on guard duty at last, instead of on standby. Then she hung the empty backpack on her doorknob and went right back to her spelling homework, like nothing whatsoever had happened. I stood at that stove with the spoon in my hand and my back turned to her for a full minute, because the rule in my house is that nobody performs their feelings in front of a 7-year-old. When I could finally talk, I said, "You don't have to be the strong one, Sophie. You don't have to be the fragile one either. You just have to be Sophie." She thought about that the way kids consider the completely obvious. "Okay," she said. "Can I have more noodles?" That was the entire ceremony. 7 years on, I'm 30 years old, and the girl with the go bag is 13 and argues with me about phone privileges like it's her salaried profession, slams her door over curfew, hollers that I'm personally ruining her life, and every unremarkable, mouthy, gloriously ordinary minute of it is the actual trophy. The backpack holds pool towels now. She packs it herself every June for swim season because she genuinely wants to. That's the entire difference in the world. And it took 2 full generations to finally purchase it. 12 years taught me exactly this. In some families, "You're the strong one" isn't a compliment at all. It's an invoice. And the day you finally stop paying it isn't the day you stop loving your family. It's the very first day you love someone, including yourself, the honest way, with both eyes open and every light in the house turned on. That's my story. 1 drained bank account. 1 packed pink backpack. And 1 sentence, finally said out loud, under oath, permanently into the record. If somebody in your life has ever called you the strong one right before handing you the bill, take this as your sign. You're allowed to say no and still be good.